Let's take a look at some information and charts on Uniswap for Brave New Coin. Uniswap is one of the OG on-chain DEX swap protocols with AMM capabilities. They've gone through 3 different versions now. We'll look at that. We'll look at the protocol revenue, how they sit amongst their peers, some on-chain stats for the token, as well as some technicals at the end. First, the user interface, stupid simple. Anybody can use this. Interoperability is excellent on Ethereum. You can just connect a MetaMask or hardware wallet and off you go, swapping anything you want for whatever you want on any DEX aggregator. They've done exactly what needed to be done for crypto. UI, UX, just give people what they want. Very simple. All of the swappers look the same. All the DEXs look the same. These are the various pools, the various fees, the various TVLs, volume, etc., etc., etc. You're usually going to see stablecoins at the top of this list, ETH and BTC also at the top of this list for every DEX. So no surprises there. They did recently delist several tokens. I think it was like 350 tokens. Might be wrong. No, 150 tokens. I don't know. Something. It was a significant amount. Most of them were either stock synthetic or synthetics tokens. So things you would mint through synthetics. I think a regulator tapped them on the shoulder and said, hey, you got to clean up some of this stuff, especially because they're in the US. The devs are at least in the US, I believe. They're vulnerable from a regulatory perspective in that regard. You definitely don't want to be in the crosshairs of targeting for unregulated assets, securities, whatever. Now, I'm sure there are things that would qualify as a security still on here somewhere, but that's for the SEC and whoever else to figure out, I guess. Looking at the TVL, it's risen considerably since version 3 was first implemented. These are stats for version 3. Volumes are basically flat, not declining, not rising per se. There was some initial pushback against V3 that it wasn't easy to use, that it wasn't friendly to new users, that sort of thing. I don't know if that's changed necessarily, but based on the TVL, it tells me that it doesn't matter because TVL is rising, so there's incentives here that bring people to Uniswap. Again, all of the trade volumes are basically stablecoins, BTC, ETH, and then the token of the exchange itself, Uni in this case. Comparing this to V2, liquidity has dropped off slightly. Volumes dropped off pretty significantly. Eventually, if incentives align, you'd expect all this liquidity to shift over to V3. Based on this, it looks like 5 billion plus 2.5 billion is 7.5 billion in TVL. Now, I don't know if that's double counted anywhere. I don't know if that's accurate. I'll look at the DeFi Llama stuff in a second. But that's a considerable amount of TVL, obviously. That's going to rise and fall with the underlying asset prices, but it is substantial. Looking at Dex Trading Volumes, this is the last 24 hours. For the most part, Uni is always going to be 50% or greater. At least has been historically. Definitely an issue for the exchanges in the rest of the 50%, especially if Uni continues to dominate. It's just going to eat everybody else's lunch, and then the rest of these are going to have to fight for the little volume that's left. Some of this is double or triple counted if it's through aggregation services like ZRX or 1inch. But Sushi is probably the most direct competitor to Uni at the moment. Unlike Uni, Sushi is kind of forced to go multi-chain, whereas Uni probably will never go multi-chain. Over the past week, again, the pink is just absolute Uni domination in volume, and historically they had a massive May and just continue to dominate. There's no question about Uni's position in the DEX market at the moment, although volumes have dropped off across the board since May 18th on DEXs. Here's the DeFi Llama stats. They don't specify here, I don't think, but I'm pretty sure this is Uni V3, or V2, my bad, V2, because it sits at that 4.92 level, and it doesn't look like they're aggregating V1, V3. Okay, so here's V3, here's V2. So again, together, this is about 7.5 billion, would sit just below Maker on this list. So considerable amount of TVL. Looking at the stats a little deeper between V2, V3, trading volumes, like I already said, have basically dwindled on V2. And as volumes dwindle, TVL is going to shift to V3, just wherever the most volume is. Transactions down, users down, Oracle calls down, call contracts declining. So it looks like V3 is a success, at least at the moment. And eventually people are going to migrate over there. Volumes on V3 flat, but still significantly higher than V2. Transactions flat, users kind of flat. So nothing super exciting there for V3, but definitely looks like V2's on the decline here. If we look at annualized revenue, this is 365 days using a 30-day sample. There's over 1.1 billion in supply side revenue here for Uniswap, a massive leader relative to its peers in revenues, protocol, or supply side. So that is substantial. I mean, legacy people look at that and they do it quadruple take. Their eyeballs pop out of their head and say, wow, that's a lot, right? People love to see this type of data for anything, but definitely DEXs as well. And we can look at a PE ratio equivalent for this kind of stuff. For Uni, it sits at about 14. You can compare Uni to Sushi, and you can compare these to Curve. Balancer is a DEX as well. Bancor is a DEX. Compound, Aave, Synthetics Maker are more lending and borrowing in my eyes. So slightly different, but Uni's positioned well from a revenue perspective, so long as those volumes stay high. And if we look at the fees per day, the top fee holder that's a non-chain is Uniswap right now. And V3 holds those top fees as opposed to V2, just another way of showing V2 is probably just eventually going to phase itself out here as V3 takes over. It's even above Binance Smart Chain, certainly above all the other DEXs, and they've also burned the most, V2 at least, has burned the most ETH with EIP 1559. Collectively, V2 and V3 have burned 5.6 thousand ETH. That's certainly substantial. So definitely a lot of activity going on with Uniswap. Nothing new there. I don't know if they support EIP 1559 as far as protocol implementations and if people are overpaying for gas, that sort of thing. Maybe somebody in the comments can help me out with that. But that's second only to OpenSea, which is just right place, right time for NFT shenanigans. Looking at the coin metrics data for the token, transaction counts basically flat for the token. Average transaction values flat as well. And you can see since February, transaction counts kind of dwindling to less than 4,000. So I don't know what you do with Uni on chain other than buy and hold it. I'm sure there's some governance thing, but in general, for most of these DeFi tokens, you're not going to be moving it around a lot. NVT, inverse metric of economic utility relative to market cap, is rising, which is bearish. NVT is basically at an all-time high. But again, if you don't have the on-chain data, NVT is kind of pointless for Uni because it's not a currency per se, so it's not really going to have appropriate values to plug into NVT. Active address is also kind of flat. Not as troublesome as it looks, considering, again, you're not going to move this stuff around frequently. And this is probably just swap related down here. There's not a lot of speculation per se going on at the moment on chain by the looks of it, even though price is up considerably from the lows. Looking at price versus MVRV, MVRV's market cap relative to realized cap, which is on-chain activity. And again, these metrics kind of don't make too much sense to look at, but I just like to look at them anyway. In general, for most coins, an MVRV above 2 has marked the top. For Uni and any of these other DeFi tokens, that isn't necessarily the case. Currently, MVRV is at 1.9. It's gotten as high as 4.26, and when price was at the top, it didn't match with a high in MVRV. So probably no signal here in general, just like NVT, just like all this on-chain stuff, just not super relevant to price. But it's worth paying attention to because it might one day be a signal for price. Looking at Uniswap, Google Trends, big spike here in May, and that's fallen 80% since the high. So nothing crazy going on with Google searches right now for Uniswap. This was kind of like pre-euphoria breakdown May 18th. Interesting that lines up like that. So if we see another spike up, maybe that's actually bearish because that just means that's the top. I don't know, just speculating as far as what kind of signal you could get from this in the future. But right now it looks fine. Doesn't look bullish, but doesn't look super bearish in that regard. If anything, you could say, well, price is sitting near an all-time high and Google Trends aren't, so maybe there's a lot of new people coming in eventually here shortly. Looking at technicals on the daily chart, this is the 5200 EMAs, VPVR, volume, and RSI. Volume on Binance extremely flat at these highs. No one seems to be super impressed just yet. This is either a relatively bearish signal or just means volume, when it comes, is going to push this thing significantly past all-time highs. Right now, I probably lean towards bearishness because RSI is also bearish here with the bear div as price rises. Price has hit its measured move from the W here between 28 and 32. It's currently at 29. And at this point, a lot of the stuff that has moved will probably get rotated out of, at least partially, as people rotate into stuff that hasn't moved. It did survive the triple bottom descending triangle potential, did survive the death cross, which was basically the bottom. So trend-wise, this looks okay, but in the near term, it probably wants to pull back to around 20 or so, as wherever the 200-day moving average is. This is for anything that's moved up this much since the bottom. It has pretty high pullback potential to those means on the low side. It's also hit its cloud edge-to-edge target. It's flat Kumo. This is a 50% retracement. Another reason to just take the pedal off the gas a little bit here on Uni. Now this may squirrel around in the cloud. It may go back to 20, go back to 30, go back to 20, 2 or 3 times. I don't know. But the initial high conviction trade is over at this point. The next high conviction trade would be a bullish Kumo breakout with price above the cloud and a bullish TK cross. So that'll happen probably in Q4. In general, I think September is just going to be garbage for crypto across the board. It historically hasn't been a great month for crypto, whereas Q4 is where the party starts again. October, November, December. If you look at the 12-hour cloud, it's also telling you it's overbought in a little different way in that we have a TKC clamp here. And this is saying if we break the blue line, the Tenkin here, it's probably going to go to the Tenkin, the red line at 22, 22 and a half, whatever that is. So this says, be careful with longs as it would with any bearish div. It says, be ready to cut your position. It says, be ready to buy down here. So don't be surprised if this stuff collectively across the board retraces in a big way. None of this stuff is going to act independently. ETH is going to do this. BTC is going to do this. Anything that's moved from the lows is going to do this. But it's definitely trend-wise a dip buying opportunity in my eyes. Looking at Uni-BTC, basically flat since February. Not a lot of action going on here. You had a 5200 crisscross, currently bullish, currently kind of Wing out up here. A little W at the bottom here, another W here, a little low time frame Adam and Eve, triple bottom. There's all sorts of mini macro patterns going on here, none of which are bearish. Kind of reminds me of Q4 2020. So I could easily see this breaking up past all-time highs. This looks really good on trend. It's above volume resistance. The measured move is around 85k sats to the upside, which probably would be an all-time high effectively. You can even argue cup and handle. You could argue all sorts of stuff here on the bullish camp. So I would not be surprised if this thing continues to move up, especially into Q4. Now, I don't know what it does in September. I'm less convinced that anything does well, but into Q4, this should do pretty well. Even against ETH, in Q4 2020, it had Adam, Eve. It had expanding, broadening wedge. It had all sorts of stuff. Broke up eventually, then developed a pretty nasty looking head and shoulders thing. Now it's got that triple bottom bull div, 12R 5200s looking to cross here soon. So it looks good against ETH too. For 0.015 is what I'd target based on volume. But this does not look bearish. This looks very bottomy to me. So in general, Uni, domination across the board. Fees, volume, TVL, on-chain metrics for DeFi stuff doesn't really seem to be relevant yet. That may change over time. Technicals for USD looks like it needs to relax a little bit. BTC and ETH technicals look bottomy, strong, ready to have another leg up based on trend. Lastly, I'll just mention the ETH-BTC fund and DeFi portfolio I trade for Techemy Capital on Enzyme.finance, a non-custodial portfolio management solution where you can send ETH or USDC or just watch what I'm doing. You can see AUM, performance, allocation, all the DeFi stuff I'm in. You can see that I'm in Uni somewhere on this list. there it is. It's in compound at the moment. You can see all the fun trades I'm making through various dexes. Sometimes this is through Uni. Most of the time it's routed through Paraswap, which is an aggregator. But you can see all that at the bottom here, along with deposits and withdrawals in and out of the fund or portfolio. That's all for this one. Like, dislike, comment, share, subscribe, and happy trading.